Up to the 1980s, there was a presumption in favor of development. This was apparently discarded, although it now seems to be heading back to favor. Surely Adam Smith's expectation of profit, mentioned above, gets trampled by a presumption against it. The problem with development control in practical terms is that no bureaucracy can deal with all issues that a creative planner can concoct. No planning department can be sufficiently well-staffed with enlightened saviors who can foresee and plan for a better future which everyone will agree with. The 5 years of the Soviets' plans never worked out. With the new One App forum, 30 or 40 subjects of concern now require specialized reports into often irrelevant minutiae, which did not matter previously. Examples of planning absurdities could go on forever, but I'll give a few examples. Flooding assessments are required for elevated urban sites. Conservation, also known as design experts, apply the arbitrary stylistic prejudices of certain elected members. Officers require full new applications for variations on old permissions of a few inches. A client of mine was approached by an enforcement officer for building her conservatory. This was in Kensington, facing the public garden. 2 extensions, old extensions of the building, and she wanted to fill in her little area, the L-shaped garden, her top of the L, with conservatory. She got permission. She decided at the last minute, instead of building right out to the face, go a foot back. The enforcement officer visited her and said, "Your conservatory is a foot too short. You're going to have to take it down a foot 5 to get into the planning." True story. I find one absurdity is the entire concept of fine-tuned use classes. 1 year, Islington stopped us from turning the top floor of a business building into an apartment for the owner. And the reason was in order to preserve employment. In the following year, the same council, in the same part of Clerkenwell, forced us to make a portion of the new office building residential to promote mixed use. As it happened, the entire road that we were going to put this new office building in was almost equally mixed with office buildings and apartment buildings. So there was this little, not terribly long road. It was absolutely like 50-50 mixed use on day one. We wanted to fill in an infill site with an office building, and they said, no, you have to split the building down the middle. So you have some office. They will not allow you to put in an apartment. The next minute, they force you to put in an apartment. How are they so wise as to know what the world needs? And then it becomes like law. So it's obligatory. Did Clerkenwell suddenly become overburdened with employment and short on residential in 1 year? Of course not. It just shows how planning has evolved to become overly prescriptive. Planners should be planning highways and power stations, not the minutiae about what someone's doing on his private property, unless he is causing a nuisance or a problem for his neighbors or the public in general. This thesis of mission creep says that if you put enough underemployed geography graduates in the room with salaries, they will find a way to devise and apply policies that interfere with basic property rights, but they're not capable of ascertaining whether or not they are delivering an essential public purpose. Bureaucracies inexorably grow internally. There's always a need for another policy and someone to apply it. And from a political point of view, you're satisfying the same prurient, prying tendencies that characterize the success of the tabloid press. People love to pry and interfere with their neighbors. There will always be more of a public who are jealous or annoyed about what developers are doing than there will be developers. And democracy favors the growth of the planning. First, there should be more development rules, where the permission procedure is unnecessary unless you wish to go beyond these rules. Secondly, planning should return to the concept of the historic nuisance tests, or at least measurable public benefit tests. Planning has become far too intrusive and arbitrary. The interest of the public is not the public interest. Thirdly, if the subject falls in the realm of another body, like building control, if these 3 things are followed, the time and expense of the present planning system to both applicants and the public will drastically reduce, and the environment will thrive. You have far less planners, far shorter periods in which to be able to know whether you can carry on or not. And thank you.
Over to you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Alfred. Does anyone want to recharge their glass with some of the tasting beer? Okay, well, on the floor-plan table, I'm very pleased to introduce David Warden. David's Director of DWG Planning Consultancy and also Principal Planner for Enfield. From our experience, and that's the little Wayne Goel office here, it's quite appropriate that David speaks for plan. On one of Wayne Goel's projects, a 9-unit new build flat in Enfield, David positively determined it, and through the pre-app and application process, it became quite clear to us that David's understanding of firstly his remit within development control, and that includes the limits and purpose he has within that, and his encyclopedic grasp and positive interpretation of the policies led to very, very helpful definitive advice. David also very much understands the difference between policy and design guidance. That came through in his consultation. Anyway, that meant I fully believe that David's input onto our scheme improved the designs. I mean, he didn't design for us, but he did prompt and ask questions of us. And I believe it improved the designs and led, with his advice was definitive, we didn't mess about, and it led to an efficient process which got approval first time on a difficult site with a very modern, and if I dare say it myself, striking building. So thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you also to Alfred for an interesting start to the debate. I'm here to speak in favour of the planning system, but first of all let me make it very clear that I don't suggest that the current system is by any means perfect. I'm sure you could all provide with examples of individual frustrations, perhaps with particular planning officers or conservation officers. What I want to focus on is the sort of detailed controls that we have within the planning system and their purpose. The fact that the UK has one of the most comprehensive planning systems in the world should be seen as a significant asset. It is much admired at an international level, primarily because it embodies a balance between certainty in the form of forward plans and the flexibility to depart from these plans, which is often not possible within zoning-based systems such as the US model that was mentioned by Alfred, or many other zoning systems that are based across Europe. Since the introduction of comprehensive controls in 1948, they were brought about by the 1947 Act, 1st of July 1948, something came in just to clarify any discrepancy there in dates. There can be no doubt that the planning system provides a significant intervention into private property interests. However, this intervention arose because of the failure of the market to provide for the needs of communities, and I suggest that such an intervention is necessary even more so today. The primary function of the system remains the balancing of private and public interests. As society continues to change, however, it is right that the system has evolved from one that sought to prevent demonstrable harm to one which has a statutory duty to contribute towards the achievement of sustainable development. This change provides a more holistic approach to the impacts of development, some of which are positive and some of which are negative. I want to touch upon some of the areas that this broadening of the scope of the system has created what I will call pinch points. Some of these have been touched upon already to a degree. The first has to be the need for an ever-increasing number of technical reports that must accompany planning applications. Whether it's an energy assessment, a code for sustainable homes pre-assessment, a habitat survey, you get the message. I accept that each costs money and takes time to produce, and the need for each of these documents on a given site, hopefully only occasionally, may be questionable. However, the aim of these documents is to seek that a better development is brought about in the public interest, looking to the longer term, dealing with matters such as climate change mitigation and biodiversity. It is this longer term vision that would be absent or lacking from a system that reduced public controls. Further pinch points arise on topics such as housing mix, minimum floor areas, or in the delightful sequential tests. Policy in these areas has typically evolved as a result of learning from past mistakes. Whilst in many locations the replacement of larger houses with flats delivered much needed housing, it also reduced the supply of larger family-sized units, and at times produced units that were questionable in terms of living space in light of their floor space. Whilst dealing with a sequential test can be a painful experience, at a basic level these tests seek to prevent, in the case of flood risk, putting people in harm's way, or in retail terms, killing off town centres in terms of 1980s out-of-centre retail developments, etc. By removing these sorts of controls, we would simply be repeating rather than learning from the mistakes of the past. Of course, it would be foolish for me to address a room of architects without talking about design. This is a further pinch point, which brings forward an ongoing question of who should decide what good design is. In the context of this debate, however, I ask whether the reduction in controls would give better design. I'm sure an immediate response might be to think of examples where planning permission has been granted and suggest to me, well, it couldn't be much worse. But to my mind, in a system with less regulations, while some would erect inspirational buildings, many would rely even more heavily on back-up fag packet design, or the creation of shameful shoeboxes, to coin a phrase. Permitted development rights have provided us with some relevant examples. For all the benefits of deregulation at a smaller scale, you only need to find the all too frequent example of a cumbersome box dormer that wraps around the roof onto the side slope of a 1930s semi, to start to question what the results might be for deregulation at the larger scale of development. The key for me with all of these pinch points is the approach taken to administering the system. Development management is the point that I'm looking to make here, the change from development control to development management. And I'm not talking just about the renaming of a department. I think you'll generally be pleased to hear the central government view expressed in the draft NPPF on what development management is about. And I'll briefly read a section for you. The primary objective of development management